Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I am so sorry. I had to restart and now things seem fine. Very strange. Okay, I'm sorry I'm late. Whew.
It's okay. We are really glad that you joined us. We'd like to welcome you. I'll just introduce you and then we'll go and start. Good
Okay.
evening and welcome to Kullavarki Design Pre-Forum 2022. Organized by the student body of the Faculty of Architecture SEPT, KVDF is more than 2 decades old platform of critical discourse on architecture and architectural education. The forum has enabled students of various millennials from across the continent to participate in a unique amalgamation of practitioners, academicians, young graduates, and students to generate a dialogue. This year, the forum manifests itself as an inquiry to deconstruct our practice as students of design. We intend to compare processes across schools and practices seeking to generate a discussion on the underlying design principles through an unpacking of design methods, sequences, and tools. Through the lens of the theme, we invite Ms. Elizabeth Sanders to introduce us to the mindset, approach, and methods of co-design. Liz Sanders is the founder of Make Tools, where she explores new spaces in the emerging design landscapes. She introduced many of the methods being used today to derive design from a human-centered perspective. Liz also teaches in the design department at the Ohio State University, where her students use co-design to address the significant challenges we face today. Liz has a PhD in experimental and quantitative psychology and a BA in psychology and anthropology. We will begin her talk titled as Exploring Co-Design in Healthcare Architecture, followed by a conversation with our faculty at School of Architecture, Ms. Ramya Ramesh. We will then open it up to the audience for questions. We have people joining in to the talk online and also a small gathering of students here on campus. People joining in online can post questions in the chat box. We welcome and invite Ms. Sanders to share her work, experiences, and processes that will help us deepen our understanding. Without further ado, over to Ms. Sanders. Thank you.
Thank you. And you need to enable screen sharing. Let me try that again. Whoops. Let me try it. I still am not able to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Thank you so much. Again, I apologize. Wait, I'm having trouble sharing my screen. Here we go. Can you see see it?
No, we are not able to see your screen. Just give us a few seconds to work out the glitch.
Okay. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay. Very good. Okay, thank you. Again, I apologize for the computer issues. So I am here today to share with you some work that I've done in co-designing in healthcare architecture. I'm going to start with some background and some basic information so that you can better understand the work that I've done in healthcare architecture. I start with the definition of design that's quite broad, where design is an inquiry into the future situation of use. So design is not just about objects, devices, buildings, and so forth, but it is essentially about future experience. Co-design then is the collaborative investigation of future situations of use, generally with designers and non-designers working together. And I'll use the term participatory design and co-design, I'll use them synonymously. And so in co-designing, we're trying to involve all the stakeholders in the design process to make sure that what we design meets their needs and is usable. And so that would mean all the people involved in bringing about the design, as well as all of those people involved who would be using what is designed at the end. And so in co-design, a simpler way of saying it is we're designing with people. and not simply for the people. And so you'll see in healthcare, we were designing with patients, family, nurses, doctors, physicians, all of the various stakeholders in healthcare. We've been using participatory design at many different levels with many different groupings within communities, between different kinds of organizations and companies. And the one that I've focused on is between, say, organizations and the people that they serve. And so my examples for healthcare architecture come from my time working inside of an architectural firm and focusing on healthcare projects. I want to differentiate the user-centered from the participatory or the co-design process. So I would imagine that you're familiar with the D-School design thinking model. So I won't elaborate on that, but I'll present it. Oops, sorry about that hanging E there. I'll present it in a more simple form. In the user-centered or design thinking model, basically the people, the stakeholders, which are represented by the purple dot. The stakeholders are, they're not brought into the process, but they're consulted in the process so that we might empathize with them in the beginning of the process, and we might bring them in to test the concepts or the solutions at the end. So it's user-centered, but they're not really in the process. And so if you look at the co-design process, you'll see that the people, the stakeholders, the purple dot then, they are involved inside every step of the process, starting with exploring the context, framing the issue, ideating solutions, prototyping. In testing, we bring new stakeholders into the process so that we have an objective sort of view on what took place. The framework that I use when approaching co-design is to listen to what people say, watch people, see what people do, and invite them to make things, to express their dreams, their fears, and so forth. So these are big categories of methods. And I do tend to use all of them simultaneously or within a project because they address different parts of this experience timeline. So you see the diagonal timeline going from the past to the future. This is the timeline of experience. And so when we watch what people do, we get a very deep but narrow understanding of their current experience. The say methods, conversations, interviews, and so forth reach out further, but it's the make methods then, and that help you understand far more about their long ago past and enable people to generate ideas and express ideas about their future experience. And so I'll be showing examples here in the second half of the presentation. A lot of my examples will focus more on the make activities because I believe that you may already have a foundation in the say and the do activities. Now, this framework addresses not exploring current experience, but exploring future experience. And so you can see it's quite similar to the say, the do, and the make, but this is all future oriented. And so instead of just watching what people do in their current lives, we have them enact future scenarios. We have them pretend or play act what could happen in the future. Instead of just listening to what they have to say, we invite them to tell stories, say, about the future. And again, the make activities here, we give people materials to make things with. And in this framework of exploring future experience, the making activities are focused on giving them the opportunity to express dreams for the future, fears for the future, as well as ideas to improve their lives. And so I tend to look at the design process in this way, where it's represented by a large sort of messy area in the front end, which I call the front end, followed by an iterative process on the right-hand side. The red dot here represents when it is that we know exactly what we're designing. And so a lot of activity is going on here in the front end, trying to make sense out of what could improve people's lives in the future. And so design then is, there's sort of the making sense of the future portion. Many of my examples will come from the making sense portion. The giving shape to the future then represents the more traditional, the more traditional parts of the design process, where concepts then are turned into prototypes, and things are iteratively tested and so forth. And so co-designing can take place at any point along this process. As I mentioned, more of my examples come from the front end, where I think the power of co-design is best used, because that's where the questions arise as to, well, what should we be designing in the first place? And then just a few basic thoughts about creativity that underlie the approach that I'm taking here. Most of what you find written about creativity has to do with individual creativity, creativity that happens, say, in the head of given individuals. Most of this research has taken place, say, by studying eminently creative people, as opposed to just ordinary kind of people. But what we're finding in studies of creativity is that it isn't just in the head of special people, but that our emotions impact our ability to be creative, so that when we are in a good mood and having a good time, we are more creative. And this is published research to support this idea. We've also found more recently that creativity takes place over time and through the body. And so that if you're moving or moving together with others, that can lead to more creativity than sitting in a chair and talking across the table. And another layer then is that the places, the spaces, the materials, everything that you have at hand is also able to impact your creativity. So I think you'll see in the examples that I'm trying to enlarge this notion of creativity to include the impact of the heart, the body, the places, the spaces, and the materials. So what about creativity taking place, not individually, but in a group? So in a group, brainstorming is a collective creativity idea, where many, many ideas are generated, but they're small ideas that the issue here is you may get many small ideas, but it isn't clear which of the ideas are good ideas. So you end up with many ideas and then a dilemma as to how to make sense out of those many ideas. If you use those layers sort of creativity and give people the space, the tools, the material, and the permission to be creative as a group, you get a different situation where the different minds are playing together, and the ideas, the orange starburst kind of idea, the ideas are bigger because they're collectively generated ideas. And then this is the ultimate situation is when you have people with very different backgrounds and experiences coming together, able to express their collective creativity, the ideas can get even bigger and more powerful. with the people in this situation. And that's the condition that is often referred to as transdisciplinarity. And so let me see that. Okay, what I want to do there is, I don't know if there's any questions at this point. That's the background. And now I'm going to move into the main portion of co-designing and healthcare architecture. Let me check. I don't see anything in the chat. Let me just wait a minute.
No, there are no questions currently. You can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So as I mentioned previously, I spent, I think about 5 years inside an architectural practice. They're called NBBJ. I was in their Columbus, Ohio office with a small team, and our charge was to bring co-design practices to healthcare. To their architectural practice. Most of the projects that we were able to work on were healthcare related, and it was interesting. The idea of bringing this approach to architecture was rather new. It was definitely not acceptable to everyone in the organization. So there were very, senior designers in the organization who were not at all interested in involving stakeholders such as patients, families, doctors, and nurses in the design development of new hospitals. So it was an interesting challenge, but we found that the healthcare architecture clients were interested in having us practice co-design to bring that into their projects, because they understood that for them it made sense to bring to bring the various stakeholders into the process in order to make sure that in the end what was designed met the needs of all the people. Anyway, so that's why most of the work that I did there had to do with healthcare. It's the clients were interested, and the architectural practice then said, okay, let's give it a try. And so early on, I noticed that I looked a lot at the forms of visualization that the teams were using. Before joining the architectural practice, most of my work was in more like industrial design and communication design. So coming into architecture was new, and there was a lot to learn. And so I noticed that what they were visualizing didn't fill up this whole map. Okay, so on the map, we have sort of the product on one side, being the building, the interior spaces, and the experience on the other side of this landscape. So that would be the experience of working in the hospital or being a patient in the hospital. Towards the bottom of this landscape, we have various visualizations that were used for making or designing the building. And on the other side, we have visualizations that were used for selling or telling or sharing or somehow communicating or collaborating with usually the client, for example. And so I noticed that pretty much their visualizations were in that lower left quadrant. They were all about making the product, designing the building. And there were some visualizations that were used for the selling, telling, and sharing aspect. So a lot of these were done in order to help the client or the organization, paying for the design work in order to help them understand what was going on. And so I saw the opportunity then to experiment and to try out other forms of visualization, and in particular to focus on using forms of visualization with the stakeholders in order to explore experience, the healthcare experience. And so here you can see that it's what I'll show you then is some of the ways we were able to explore these other forms of visualization. And I won't read through those because I have examples of them coming. And so here, and so what I do from here on is I have many different examples. And these are all from pretty much, I think, all from projects with this architectural practice. And so here is a group activity of, I've given the team a group of images, words, shapes, and so forth, and enabled them then to collaboratively create a future vision, in this case for CHOP, a specific client. So this was all the materials were prepared ahead of time, but the team then could pick and choose which aspects they wanted to see in their future vision for this hospital. So you see they're working on a bullseye. The center of the bullseye represents the most important components of that vision. And as you move outward, things become less crucial, but also of interest, and everything beyond the outer line are attributes that they would not want to have in the future vision. The vision then, it isn't the vision of the building, it's a vision of the experiences, that future experiences that the stakeholders would have in this hospital that does not yet exist. So a team spent quite a while coming up with their vision in the bullseye. And then what we always do is have somebody in the team present what they were thinking as they created this vision. And that's very important because if you can see some of the images here, the images are, like I said, they're not images necessarily of the building, they're images that evoke feelings. And you'll notice there's a golden retriever in the middle of the bullseye. And I remember that this was not taken literally. It wasn't that they wanted golden retrievers sitting in the lobby waiting for people, but they wanted the feeling of walking in to be as though you were being greeted by your dog at home, that the feeling of familiarity and comfort was there. And so this is visioning workshop, a lot of times done very, very, very early in the project, involving the entire architectural team, the landscape team, as well as representatives from all over the hospital. This is a different kind of visioning workshop. Each person is creating their own vision at the table. These are all former patients of a hospital, of the hospital that the hospital system we're redesigning. And they've been asked to use the visual materials that we've given them to express their thoughts and ideas about ideal healthcare experience. And again, after they do their making, they present. And that way we understand better why they chose the images and what the images meant to them. And so you can see here, this is a single individual's representation of the ideal healthcare experience. And you see sort of the core role the physician plays in this experience. This is another person's ideal vision. So it's interesting to note that this person and this person had exactly the same materials to work with, yet their representation of future healthcare is quite different. And so another lecture would be, well, how do you analyze, how do you bring all this together? How do you bring this information into the design process? I'm not going to focus on that, but in the questions, I can talk about that if you are interested. And so here, actually, I forgot I had this slide in here. Here's one way that we've summarized. So we had 28 people doing the exercise individually about their ideal healthcare experience. And we just counted up who used which images and who used which words. And in the core of the bullseye, you see those images that were selected by like half of the people, 13 to 15 out of 28, half of the people selected these images and so forth. So this study was a little bit controversial because when we presented it to the architectural team, I think you'll notice that in the core of this expression, there's no building, there's no space, there's no room, there's just people. And I think that was difficult for the architectural team to acknowledge that was the core of the experience as opposed to the building. Now you do see some images of a chapel and a garden and so forth. Here's a different project. Here around the table, we have 3 nurses. They don't work together. They're from different floors, but we brought them together to collaborate on an ideal patient unit, not the whole floor, but say a unit. And we've given them toolkit materials that are quite abstract. So you'll notice they're being asked to imagine the unit, but we haven't given them anything that's square or rectangular. We deliberately did not want them to design the space at this point in the project. What we wanted them to do was to consider the flow of people, the flow of information, the flow of materials and supplies, the flow of trash. And so here's one of the solutions from a given team. And obviously then they presented it as well. Again, here, a similar activity in a different hospital. And you notice that the sessions are going on at lunchtime in the break room because we have to work very, very quickly, and we have to go to where, in this case, the nurses are because they're busy people, and it's hard to get their time for activities like this. And so we've worked out many ways of doing this very quickly and efficiently in order to get their lived experience out into the open here. This is a situation where we have a large group of people divided into teams. Each team is then tasked with coming up with a representation of patient family experience in what would be their future. This was a project from a while back. And so here you see the future is represented not necessarily in a bullseye, but in a timeline. And what they're making and visualizing, again, it's not the building, it's the experience of patients, family, and healthcare providers. In this situation, we're exploring just the patient room, the room itself, and we're asking patients, family members, nurses, and others to express what they feel the current experience is along a timeline from getting into the hospital for the patient to leaving the hospital. Here, everything above the line is positive. Everything below the line is negative. The farther down you go on the paper, the more negative it is. So it's quite clear to see here how negative and impactful the smell is in the hospital. Again, many examples. Here we have another room-based activity. And these are 2 former heart patients who've come to take part in the session. And they had the opportunity then to create their ideal patient room. This was in the design of a new heart hospital. And so these were patients who spent weeks to months in the hospital. And so they would consider, have a lot of expertise in what would be needed. And so you see here, we given them representative and scale-oriented items like the bed, the window, and so forth. But they also had access to all kinds of other amenities and images to express their feelings. This is a three-dimensional toolkit. And this one is all based on the objects towards the back then are all covered with Velcro, so that all the little knobs and colorful pieces then could stick right onto the Velcro. And in this situation, we were in a hospital exploring future communication technology. And the participants were designers, design consultants, and people working in the hospital. This was an ideal situation where we could do the making, the telling, and the enacting all in a workshop. So they would make their future devices. And then because we're in a hospital doing this, they were enabled to enact or show us how their future devices would work. They could enact these scenarios in actual hospital rooms and then tell their future stories in that way. Here's another three-dimensional toolkit. This one I call the dollhouse, because as you'll see, you'll see the dolls. It has many, many, many pieces with scaled to fit in this hospital room. So the size of the hospital room has been predetermined by rules and regulations. You see, we have the walls a clear plexiglass so that they could be constrained by the size, but they could also see, they could better see what they were doing. So the activity here, again, we have 3 nurses from different units in the hospital given the opportunity to use the parts and pieces to make a hospital room that would better suit their needs. This was an amazing session. I remember these, like I said, these 3 women did not know each other before coming to the session. They met each other, they shared grievances about rooms that they worked in and what was good and what was bad. And then when they were given the opportunity to make this room, I think it took 12 minutes in total for these 3 previously strangers, 3 minutes or 12 minutes to come up with the design. So you see here, first of all, they cheated and they added a bathroom outside of the walls of the room. There were several teams doing this at once, and so by the time I got back, it was already done. But then again, as research, you take it and you think, well, obviously this room is not big enough for everything that wants to go into it. But you'll see that it looks like a 2-bed hospital room. But when they present what they've made, it becomes clear that it's only the white-haired lady is the patient in the patient bed, and her husband is on a couch on the other side of the room. So it becomes clear what the meaning was exactly here. You'll see that a lot of the pieces, some of them are very concrete and specific, like the lamp and the chair. But a number of the pieces are ambiguous, deliberately ambiguous. Because here, what happened is one of the groups said, we don't think the patient rooms are that bad. Could we please take your activity and your dollhouse materials? Could we rethink our nursing station instead? And that's what they did here. They rebuilt a nursing station according to their needs out of the same parts. And so you see here, her workstation is one of the beds. from the earlier example. So the ambiguity of the pieces let them, one team made a hospital room, another team made a workstation for nurses. And you notice that they labeled everything very explicitly in order to make sure that when we took their concept away, that we would understand fully what they had in mind. Here we are full scale. This is a full scale prototype. So you see the particle board in the back there. So it's a mock-up of a patient room. And the reason it was mocked up and tested was the architectural team had designed a room that was that had an unusual shape. In other words, it wasn't a rectangle or a square. It was something that had never been done before in a hospital. And people were worried that that it wouldn't work. And so what we did then is mocked it up full scale and had nurse volunteers come in and play act. So they play act like the person in the bed is a nurse pretending to be the patient. Everybody put on a different role, and they enacted various scenarios, such as just checking in, a code, where people all rush into the room. So they had all these different scenarios to act out to see if the room worked. The room worked, and the room worked so well that they ended up having, I think they scheduled, a 3-hour session. They ended up being done in half of that time because the room worked so well. And then this was quite interesting to me. They took advantage of the fact that they had built a really, really rough full-scale room, and the nurses then started critiquing everything about the room. And a lot of their attention turned towards hand washing and trash handling. Because apparently in hospital projects, activities like, where are all the hand washing components? Where does the trash go? All of those aspects tend to be thought about, in my opinion, far too late in the design process. It's kind of like, oh yeah, where does the trash go? And so this was giving the nurses an opportunity to share their thoughts about what architects would consider details that they did not consider details at all, but be able to share that at a time in the process where it could actually have an impact on the design. So the lady in the front then is, very carefully scribbling down all the notes about what she's learning as the nurses give comments on what they'd like to see in terms of trash handling and hand hygiene. So this was a very happy accident that time was left over for this activity. So I understand now building full-scale mock-ups has become more common practice in architecture. But I think here we show the value of really, really rough full-scale prototypes are even better, because you're going to be able to get a lot more input to something that looks unfinished and ready for input. And so you see here, they've redesigned the sink and where it goes, and the entire sort of setup for hand hygiene with the leftover time from testing the room. Personas and scenarios are ways that we've, these are communication tools for both the client and for our architectural team in better understanding the needs of, in this case, patients, but also family members and other healthcare providers. So we try to keep these front and center. And these are personas that are based on, they're not made up, they are based on interviews and observations of actual people. So I think here, I don't know if there's, let me look in the chat. Okay, there's no, we'll do all the questions later. What I've done here is just put together put together a project sort of in order of time, so you can kind of see the flow of activities and visualization exercises that we might do in the order in which they would occur. Because in the presentation that I just shared with you, things are just sort of randomly oriented. And so this was work that was done at the Heart Hospital, the Moffitt Heart Center, Cancer Center. It's a Moffitt Cancer Center, but what we were doing there was building a new heart hospital for the center. So we started with observations. We did 3 participatory workshops with nurses, and then we also did a participatory workshop with members of the advisory board. Before meeting with the nurses in the participatory workshops, we gave them homework. And here you can see it's a unit, and we've asked them before coming to meet with us to annotate this floor plan and indicate where they do their work, where are some of the issues, where are they challenged, where are the problems. And so this is a way of helping us understand the current situation much more quickly than spending a couple of weeks watching. I think observational and ethnographic research is really valuable, but it's quite time demanding. And so like I said earlier, we've worked a lot on ways of getting the information that we need, but much more efficiently. And then doing this activity then for the nurses also gets them to sit down and think and reflect on how they work, why they do things the way they do things. And this is important for preparing them for creative sessions, is to give them an opportunity then to think about what they actually do. And so the nurses then shared their homework with each other. And like I mentioned earlier, this is the workshop of exploring the unit of the patient, of the patient floor unit. So again, so here's the team that we saw pictured. Here's what they came up with. A different team with exactly the same toolkit, the materials and instructions, came up with many different, a very different visual representation and different ideas. Again, a third team. So you can see, in a sense, the simplicity and the ambiguity of the components that we give them help us to sort of pull out the creativity of each group. And again, this was analyzed. There were a number of groups. We analyzed it and into sort of it's a diagram. It's not a floor plan. It's more conceptual diagram. And we were very careful to call this Nurse Dreamland, because there's things in this concept that would never get built, such as a balcony on an upper floor would not be permitted by code and so forth. And so this is a concept for Nurse Dreamland. It's a summary of what they wish, but it isn't, say, a directive to the design team at this point. And again, different layers showing what we learned about the flow of supplies, meds, and so forth. We also did the dollhouse toolkit at a later stage with the focus on the room, as opposed to the unit. And I talked through these, so we'll just skip over. Again, another team chose to do their nurse station instead of a patient room. And so you can see here, a lot of the ambiguous pieces here then turned into screens, workstations, stools, and so forth. We then summarized the results of the dollhouse exercise by creating a summary dollhouse with the actual dollhouse. So within this sort of solution space, we analyzed and put all the ideas together and then shared it by sort of focusing on the different, I would say, themes that we saw emerging. The technology wall, privacy control barriers. Again, using the 3D visualization, the crude visualization, as a way of showing where the key ideas were. Then with the former patients, this was for the heart hospital. Here's a shot of the toolkit materials that we provided for them. This is quite an elaborate toolkit. We weren't sure, this was the first time that we had tried using sort of, you see in the background is sort of a scaled room. This is the first time we had tried getting them to map a space, a two-dimensional space out, and we weren't sure how that was going to go. So we had a lot of different layers on the toolkit. It went very well. And so here you can see some of the different artifacts that the former patients came up with. Interesting, you see on the left here, they had so many ideas, and they had more ideas than they could even visualize through our materials. And so this team, this was Joyce and Larry, they came up with 9 additional sort of inventions here. Now the hearts, what the hearts represent are votings from other teams. So we had maybe 6 teams of former heart patients doing this exercise. Each team presented to the whole room, and then they were given a small, a medium, and a large heart, each individual, so they could vote on what they thought the best ideas were from other teams. And so you see this concept received a number of very large hearts and a small one from others. Again, these are just showing how different teams visualize their thinking in the exercise and sort of where the hearts fell. Again, the toolkit worked very well. It enabled them to imagine and dream what could be. But you'll notice a lot of sort of annotation and ad-libbing so that the patients could tell us exactly what they meant in this situation. And so what was interesting here, by the time we analyzed the data from all the different groups, I think we had close to like 100 ideas, and then working with the architects on the team, it was kind of like, well, that's fine. 100 ideas is great, but we have 100 ideas every day. So we're not that much interested in how many ideas emerged, but because of the presentation, the discussion, and the heart stickers, we were able then to narrow it down to the top 10 ideas for the ideal patient room. And not only that, we were able to prioritize the top 10. And so that we can see that the top idea for former heart patients is that there be a heavenly bed, heavenly referred to the pillow and the sheets and the blankets and just the comfort of the bed, a heavenly bed close to the bathroom. And so what we learned in this is that part of the main value here was not just getting ideas from the stakeholders, but our ability to help the designers understand where are the big ideas, where are the ideas that would really make a difference, in this case, to patients. And so they found this top 10 list incredibly useful for driving the design process from the patient's point of view. We also presented, and this is just the short list of design principles from the perspective of patients in order to help the architectural design team then a different way of having them understand what was needed from their perspective. And I end here with just another observation from working with the architects. Once we started working in this way with the materials and the tools and the dollhouse and so forth, there was a tendency for other teams to come and say, wow, we saw what you were doing. That looked really interesting. Can we borrow your tools and do it ourselves? And I don't know, that it just didn't, that concerned me because it wasn't clear that, it wasn't clear what they were going to do with the tools. How did they know how to use the tools within a method? Did they know how to organize the methods into methodologies? In other words, you can't just bring the dollhouse to a group of nurses and say, here, make your ideal patient room. They need to have homework where they think about where the patient room is working now, where it's not working now. They need to have a discussion amongst themselves about the things they hate the most about the patient room before they can get started and be creative. And so I generated this diagram to make the point that in co-design, it isn't just a matter of using the tools and the techniques and the methods, but in order to maximize the application of co-design, the mindset of the team facilitating the co-design activities needs to be of a participatory mindset. So if your team, for example, so part of this mindset is, I believe that everyone is creative, not just people trained in the creative fields. Everyone is creative. And if we give them the appropriate sort of context for creativity, the place, the space, the materials, the confidence, and all of that, everybody can be creative. And so when you have the mindset, the methodologies, the methods, and the technique and the tools, they're all together, it can be a very, very powerful thing to execute. So I tried to point out that it isn't just a matter of the tools and the methods, but it's how they're used and the attitude with which they're given to the stakeholders for their use and how their work is then received. And so then, a true participatory culture takes quite some time to emerge. But that was sort of my way of explaining my discomfort in just handing over tools for teams to use without knowing kind of where they fit on this framework of co-creation in healthcare. Okay, so that is the end of my slides. Let me stop. Okay, good. So we're not too far behind schedule.
No.
Yeah. Now, do we want to take a quick break before questions or just go right into questions?
We can take a 5-minute break and then.
Okay. Okay, so we'll be back at 9:14. Okay, 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Later.
Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. It was really very different for us, actually, and a very different approach for us. I would like to call Ms. Ramya to open up the conversation ahead. And the attendees can ask questions in the Q&A, and we also have few students who would like to ask questions from there. Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanders. I think you made a very complex process look so simple. And I guess, as you said, the simplicity and ambiguity of the tools and methods is what makes it so valuable. But the first thing that really struck me was that the designers that you were working with didn't really want to do this. So what was that? I mean, why did that happen? And how did you convince them, or how did they get involved? And did their involvement as designers add any value to the process at all?
It was mainly the most senior members of the firm that were not exactly in favor of how we were approaching things. Although it was one of the most senior members of the firm who brought us in. So it's sort of ironic in that way, but as a whole, the principles of the firm, I guess they were thinking that, well, obviously they were very successful. They already knew what they were doing. Why would they change? You know what I mean? Why would that be needed? So one of the ways, so some of what we did was, frankly, some of what we did is we did non-architectural projects just to make sure that we were being able to bill our time to a client. So in the very early days, it was just, well, let's just get work. Let's do work so that we don't get laid off from the firm. For example, did a whole project just on hand hygiene, which was related, but it wasn't architecture at all. So what we did was we would, present the ideas and work with other groups that were interested. We found that the planners were very interested in collaborating with us, learning from us, and our learning from them at every step of the way. So the planners were the healthcare planners in particular were our big allies. And they helped us then better understand the firm and how to infiltrate. And the landscape architectures were also interested in some of the tools and methods. So it wasn't the whole firm, it was just the most senior people, which of course can be an issue. So we just started slowly and looked for opportunities.
Okay, but did the architects eventually get involved in the process, or were they just at the receiving end of the results that you analyzed?
Some of them, no, I would say that the senior people leading the projects, no, they were just overseeing everything. They tended not to get so much involved. But then again, in one of the projects, which was for a veteran healthcare system in New Orleans, it was the client, the Veterans Administration client said, oh, we want this co-design. We want this on our, we want you to offer this. And so the principal of that project had to invite us in.
Okay. And how do you deal with scale when it comes to this kind of a process? Meaning, if you were to co-design a large public building, which was to be used by the whole city, let's say, and the city has millions of people. So do you think a co-design process like this that, by conducting vision workshops or experience models, do you think it is restricted to certain scales of imagination of spaces, or do you think that it can work
at large scales as well. So when I say scale, I'm also talking about not just the number and types of stakeholders, but also the scale of the building.
Yeah, I think that I don't think it's ever possible to include all of the users or inhabitants of large spaces. And any hospital is in that situation. What we're doing there is we're bringing in representatives. So we make sure to have representatives of all the various functions within the hospital involved throughout the whole process. So we're relying on them to play that role. But now I think now with all the tools and VR and what we have available online, I think it is possible to bring far more people into this process than ever before. So you'll notice a lot of what I showed you definitely was from before COVID. And again, yeah, it is ideal when making to have paper stuff or, to have physical materials to make with and to collaborate over. But we've been able to implement all of the two-dimensional toolkits on Miro. And we're able to do individual and collective creativity sessions on Miro for the past few years. And in fact, one of my graduate students then created a co-creation intensive care unit scenario space. And so and this was a graduate team within VR, we have a virtual full-scale intensive care unit room where everything can be moved and changed. And in fact, being virtual, it's a lot easier to change things like the location of the window, the color on the walls, the lighting, the height. Everything is more malleable in VR. So we've been able to do the dollhouse, fully immersive, feeling like full-scale intensive care unit exercises. And I anticipate we'll be doing more of that in the future. So it's co-creation in VR.
Great. So you're expanding your, let's say, the whole database of tools that you have to kind of. That's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, also, I'm working with a couple people now. What we're doing is we're putting online. We're calling it the Healthcare Co-Design Toolbox. So we're creating a space on Notion where we're providing a lot of images, words, phrases. It's all two-dimensional, but we're creating a space where you can go and make toolkits for healthcare innovation online, and we'll make it openly available. So, and we're encouraging people then to use it, but also then to show how they've used it as well. So yeah, COVID had some positive impact on bringing all this online.
That's amazing, because then you see that the people who, in my experience, are usually difficult to gather are actually the people who are interested in the process. So, but coming from the perspective of an architect, I think a lot of the students' questions are oriented towards being able to translate these ideas or these inputs into design. So how did that process happen? I mean, it was amazing how you summarized people's inputs in the 2D and 3D format. But how did the architects take it? And a lot of the times, it might also be disappointing when you summarize the inputs. I mean, might be like, you already know this. Why did we do the whole process? So were there any kind of eureka moments in that process? And did that help translate the whole process into the design of the building?
I think that the best cases that we had of integrating into design was when a designer joined us in the research. So what we did is we tried to get the designers sitting with us as we were planning the co-design sessions. They were there with us and they were offering suggestions for, oh, what if we did this or what if we did that? So they helped in planning the sessions. We got them to come with us and hold the camera. We got them to be at all the sessions, listening, say, to the nurses firsthand. We invited them to everything. We tended to analyze it more ourselves just because of the time involved in doing that. But then once we would summarize it, for example, we would invite the architects on the team to help interpret it. And then, so if you've got an architect helping us plan, going to the sessions, interpreting the summaries, then the translation from research to design is in that person. Then they take what they've learned and they go into their design phase. That's the ideal situation, is where we bring a designer through the research and prepare them for the design using everything we learned in the research. That didn't always happen. And so what we made a point of, say, visualizing, as much as like the summarizing visually, as opposed to verbally, so that the architects, the planners and so forth could kind of see what we mean in a language that they could relate to better as well.
So what did your team consist of? What was the background of people who were actually involved in the research, apart from the occasional architect?
The co-design research team, two of the members, one was a very senior person with a background in industrial design, with many years of experience as an industrial designer, but having worked a lot with healthcare, say, Herman Miller chairs and things like that. Another was a more junior person with a degree in industrial design and a work experience in design research. Another person on the team was already at the architectural firm, working mainly, say, in client relationships. And she was sort of put on the team. I don't know, she was just sort of put on the team. She had no experience in design or research, but she has phenomenal interpersonal skills, we found. And so it was quite easy to bring her into the process, from sort of the interviewing conversation, the facilitation, all of those activities where she excelled. So it was like, I'm a psychologist, anthropologist, two trained in industrial design, and one person with a lot of interpersonal skills. So that core, and then there was another junior person with a background in industrial design again.
Great. So when the designer came in, you said that the designer had something to take back from the process and possibly translate that into their design. But did the designer add any value to the process because of their own training, or not really? Just
yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think especially if we could get the designer involved in the planning of the workshops. Like, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Or here's the toolkit. Do you see something that's missing? So absolutely, the designers contributed immensely. And also, if we were working more, say, in landscape architecture, just having them there with us helped us sort of jump into that aspect more quickly.
So what aspects do you think architects contributed in this whole designing of the workshop? Would you be able to articulate that?
Well, I think part of it was, they had experience in healthcare design. And so they had thought about many ideas, or they tried various ideas out. So they were sort of immersed in the context. Because remember, we were coming into it fairly new. But some of the designers had been in healthcare or landscape architecture for some time. And so they had seen a lot, they knew the trends, and this and that. So I think it was more their background experience was incredibly valuable. And also they're just good idea people. So, yeah.
Okay, that's quite encouraging to know. But I'm sure there were many challenges in this whole process. So did you see at any point the co-design process failing? Meaning, did you feel like, you put in all the effort to build the toolkit and to engage people, but there's nothing really coming out of it for the designers or for the people? Meaning, at some point, even if you don't intend to, did these processes become kind of tokenistic? Like, how do you know you've done enough participation?
You probably never get to do as much as you would like to do. I think what we tried to figure out is how to do as much as we could for the given time and budget allotted. I would say that all of our sessions were all useful and positive. Now, whether they all translated into the design solutions, I don't know. I do know for the projects that we had where we could tightly integrate with the designers, things did get incorporated. But that, and on some projects, I'd say a failure would be that we were involved in the beginning and then dropped from the process because of time and money. And so we wouldn't have the opportunity then to learn, what actually happened in the final design. So I think, yeah, there were places where we did the work and it wasn't necessarily incorporated.
So were there also instances where the work did translate into some good design ideas eventually in the building? And
yes,
what kind of design ideas did they translate into? Because
well, I'll tell you my favorite one. So this had to do with we were redesigning the hospital system after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So this was a while ago. And in the field research, we did field research at other veterans hospitals just because theirs had been destroyed. So there was no hospital system there at the time. And so I remember at one point we visited the Veterans Administration Clinic here in Columbus, Ohio. And I was walking around doing observations. I went into the gift shop and I noticed that there was candy and gifts and this and that, but there were also shorts and underwear for sale in the gift shop. And so I asked, I was wondering why were you selling shorts and underwear at the gift shop? And they said, well, if you think about it, once you park, you park in the parking lot and you walk in, and the bathrooms are way at the other end of the building. And sometimes people don't make it to the bathroom. So they would be driving there from all over Ohio. They get to the building, they walk in. Where's the bathroom? Oh, well, you have to sign in, you have to do this, you have to do that. And so anyway, we learned about how important it is to locate the bathrooms in a clinic or a hospital like that. And so one thing that we did in the big New Orleans project is we actually we did research with veterans. The same issue came up. I have a 3-hour drive here. I want to get out of my car. I want to walk in and go to the bathroom. And so we caused them to relocate all the bathrooms on the main floor. And that seems like a minor thing, but no, it's not minor. if you're somebody driving there for that many hours, that's kind of a major thing. So that's one of the things that I'm most proud of.
Great. I'm sure. So did that project get realized, or
Oh,
is it
yeah,
still in
yeah.
the design stage? Okay, okay, great.
Yeah, so it's, I forget what the name of it, it's the new hospital, whatever, the Veterans Hospital in New Orleans. So it's not just, it's like, it's a whole complex of buildings.
Great. And so the next series of questions is all about the toolkit, because now as architects getting involved in the co-design process, we're really curious about how that toolkit really gets made. You know, how do you choose the sky as an image and not something else? Or and how what about the universality of the toolkit? Yeah. Is it universal, or do you need to develop a toolkit every time? So let's say even within healthcare architecture, you're designing another hospital. Do you need to again redevelop a toolkit, or are there aspects of the toolkit that you kind of reuse?
That's a real good question. I will say yes, for every project. I wouldn't say they are new toolkits, but custom toolkits are made for every project, but they all draw from the toolbox. Okay, so the toolbox is the set of all images, words, phrases, dollhouse parts. The toolbox contains everything that I've ever used. And so one thing I'll do is I might pull out a toolkit I've used before and change it and customize it to the next situation, because you want some parts in the toolkit that relate specifically to what country they live in or what part of the country they live. You know, you want some things that connect directly to them. So the toolbox is universal. I think at this point, I think in terms of language and multicultural, I would say it's probably not multicultural enough to work across all countries, but it would certainly work as the base from which to customize. So every situation is different, but there's a lot of stuff to draw from.
So does that mean that you extensively research the cultural context before you modify your toolkit?
Yes, or manage to get people from that culture on our team. Right. And if we can't do that, then we would at least have a session where we talk to them about, here's what we're doing, here's how we're going to do it. What do you think about our plan so far?
And are these people usually satisfied with the process? Because I mean, how do we make sure that this doesn't become extractive? You know, like that it doesn't become a process of data collection just for the team. And what's in it for the people who are taking part in the process?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think we have to be careful about managing expectations there, because in the heart hospital, remember I showed the diagram of Nurse Dreamland. So we had to make it real clear that for the nurses, we want to hear all your ideas, just share with us, but realize that we won't be able to, you're not going to see all of your ideas in the new hospital, because we won't be able to address them all, or some of them are not to code. We still want to understand what your dreams are. So one thing we do is we manage their expectations so that they know what the data is used for. I think most people are quite happy to be asked to participate and to have a voice. If not in hospital projects, most of our stakeholders are volunteering their time. In commercial practice, most of the co-design I've done, we're paying people to be participants. Because that's the, just regular consumers or whatever, that's the only way we can get them. So in those cases, they are paid well for their time. And they understand that we may take their ideas and run with them. We may not. So I think it's important to be upfront with why we're doing it, how it's going to be used. Are we, and if we're videotaping, all of those ethical issues need to be addressed up front. But I think most people have a whole lot of fun, especially when it comes to the future visioning. And they take away an enjoyable collaboration. Oh, I don't hear, your mic is off.
Something. Yeah, thank you so much. I will now pass on the mic to some students. I tried to address most of the questions, but if I haven't, please come forward and ask. There are also some questions in the chat, Q&A. So
yeah.
maybe
Do you want me to address those?
Yeah,
okay.
so maybe we can have the students come over first, and then we can probably address the ones in the chat, if that's okay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Am I audible? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Nikhila, and first of all, thank you for such an enlightening lecture.
Thank you.
And one thing that I observed through the lecture was that you've described the various tools used in process stages of design. Like first, we talked about tools used in pre-design stages, for example, the bullseye chart, and then the generative stage, and then the evaluative stage, for example, the prototyping. So one thing I observed in that was that for example, in the bullseye chart, people were involved in activities of doing and saying, but not so much in enacting and making. But the opposite was observed in generative tools and in prototypes, where they were directly involved in activities of enacting. So have you ever observed or generated pre-designed tools that involved enacting and making strategies? Or is there a reason why there is such a level of participation in the pre-design stage or perhaps in the evaluative stage?
Yeah, I think that even in the first bullseye, that is a making activity. They are placing pictures, say, on the bullseye. They're making a representation of what's important. So were you thinking the making was more three-dimensional?
I think I meant something that communicates what they would like in the future, because what I understood was that, for example, enacting could also communicate, something they want in the speculative future. And so what they're doing by putting up the pictures or the emotions that they felt was ideal would probably be something that they're either talking about in the past or something about the present. So yeah.
Okay. We have used improv, like improvisation methods, as a way of getting people, like, really, really early in the process to, usually we use it collaboratively, sort of act out future scenarios. Another one was with the Velcro communication tool exercise in the hospital, where we had the ideal situation was where they make something, and maybe it's a three-dimensional something, and then they enact future stories using what they've made.
Okay.
And that can happen really, really, really early in the process. Sometimes then if they're working, say, at the scale of the dollhouse, they will enact with the dolls. When they present, they'll go, okay, and we would enter here, and then we would do, and they're, you know what I mean? They're holding the doll as they walk through it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I have different I have like tiny little dolls. I have a lot of human sort of figures that we can use to enact at different levels of scale within, say, a floor plan or a room size scale.
Right, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that would lead to my other question, which is, so when we're looking at a co-design process, ideally we would want level of participation to reach somewhere where it's not just consultation, right?
Yeah.
And however, in one of your papers, I've observed that where you've categorized actually probes, prototypes, and toolkits across the timeline, and how probes and prototypes usually fall under designing for and not designing with. So does that prove beneficial that falls under designing for, or are we trying to work towards a stage where these tools are completely ideally in level of designing with?
I think a lot of those tools can be repositioned and put in the hands of the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, we could have them designing the probes, so to speak, or I call them provotypes. So a provocative prototype. So instead of making, say, a prototype, they're encouraged to make a provocative prototype. So what I've done is, like, even with sort of the notion of personas, is that in addition to using the persona, like the persona poster I showed to summarize what we've learned in research, as a co-design tool, you can give people a toolkit so they make the persona. That they might make the the ideal patient persona and the worst patient persona. In other words, give whatever these design tools are that we're using for designing for people, most of them, I think, can be repurposed and put in the hands of the stakeholders,
Right. Yeah.
as co-design tools.
Yeah.
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 And then you can't, I think with co-design, you have to start small and grow it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a different approach. So one approach I've taken is just sort of have one good success, share it, and then grow it as it goes on. There's nothing wrong with designing for, but if you have the opportunity and the people interested in it, I think designing with. Now the other thing too is if you're interested in designing with and co-design, and you're not sure where to start pilot test on each other. Like make a toolkit, and make the toolkit with a team. Okay, it's best doing a toolkit as a team, and then get another team and have them be your participants and see what happens.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Are there any other students or? Oh, okay. In the chat, the question and answer. Okay. So one of them asked, "Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I completely agree with the tools and methods argument." Oh, I think the first question we already asked.
Oh, the professional background. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we've covered that. I think.
Well, and I think the list.
We've kind of covered all the questions, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, how can you get the confidence that we've done enough participation? I think you can never really get enough. The rule I use is if I start to hear the same ideas or the same themes come up, then it's a signal that maybe we have enough input. But I think usually what I do is just try to maximize the time and the budget and get as much as we possibly can to move forward with.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Who is the online student who would like to ask question? Can you please raise your hand so that I can see you? Okay. There is a student joining online who would like to ask a question, and
Okay.
I'm trying to unmute her. I don't know how to do that. Can the host?
They're unmuted now. I think.
No. Prachi Agarwal wants to ask a question. Can you unmute her? Yeah. Prachi, please. go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, your presentation was really interesting, and I wanted to know that how does the process of co-creating or co-designing evolves over the time? Like, does it start with being generic and then get narrowed down to the specific details of the space, how the users are expecting like how do they traverse within the space?
Yeah, I would say it starts with experience without even necessarily, first is experience, and space is just a component of that. But it starts very general. It starts with thoughts and feelings about hospital visits, for example. And then it does get more specific. It gets more concrete in terms of spaces and more detailed and elaborate as we go down. But it starts with experience and feelings. And then it would end with, say, the space, the building, the rooms, the hand washing station, and so forth. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, there's another question here in the Q&A. How do you make sure that the activities aren't such that the spectrum of answers isn't narrowed down or restrictive? That's a very good question. And I think that part of the art of making the toolkit is to use a team to make a toolkit, to go through some iterations on it and to pilot test it, so that the toolkit shouldn't narrow down. It should serve to help them generate more ideas. And in the toolkit, there's always blank items. There's always, like, if there's words on stickers, there's always 5 or 6 stickers that have no words on them, because that says, oh, write your own words on these stickers. So there's always this invitation to go beyond, to use the toolkit to generate ideas, to express ideas, but to go beyond it. And in the heart hospital examples, you saw a lot of annotation on the paper, where the participants knew that they had more ideas than were in the toolkit, so they just started writing lists of all their ideas. So that's what you want, is a toolkit that opens up their creativity. And part of that is if you truly believe they're creative, they can tell whether you believe that or not. Like, if you don't believe they're going to be creative, they're not going to be creative. So that's important too, is that the person asking people to be creative is very excited and absolutely positive that what they create will be great.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanders. I think we will have to end the session here.
Okay.
But really, thank you so much. It was a very enlightening presentation, and also a very enlightening discussion. I'll pass on the mic now to the organizers. Thank you once again.
Good. Thank you too. And if you have specific questions for later, just send me an email. And I think you guys have my emails. Yeah.
Yes, we'll surely send that ahead. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. We all the students actually feel really very grateful that we were able to get to know about this and this whole approach. And it was actually very enlightening for most of us.
And being undergraduate architecture students, it was a very different approach for us to know. And we really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much for meeting us.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for the delay. Next time I'll restart much earlier. But I'm glad we finally connected. I was kind of worried for a while. Thank you, everybody. I've enjoyed it. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.